Prior to landing my current job as a product design intern, I applied to 123 jobs. I got rejected 64 times. I had 8 first-round interviews at places like CIBC, Manulife, The Score, ghosted once after a first-round interview. I had 3 second-round interviews, and I finally received 2 final offers. So I'll be walking you through my whole job application process from start to finish. So what I did to prepare for the interviews, the resumes I sent, clips of email threads, and basically all the juicy stuff that goes into a job application. I'm sharing my story with you, so hopefully you can take inspiration from my journey and use parts of it to hopefully increase your chances of landing your dream internship. So for my current summer work term, which is May to August, I started applying in late November, and then I applied all the way through mid-March, which was when I got my 2 offers from The Score and Vendor PM. So I'm going to focus on the 2 jobs that I received offers from, because those are what produce results and what take you from the start of the job application process to the end. For The Score product design intern, I applied February 4th with this resume and with this cover letter. They contacted me March 1st. The first interview was for 45 minutes with 2 product designers March 9th, and the second interview was 30 minutes with 1 product designer from the previous interview and the director of product design, which was on March 14th. And the verbal offer I received on March 15th, and this is a snippet of that video. I recorded myself as the recruiter was calling me to let me know that I received the offer.
The team truly did have such great conversation with you and really hope to have you join the team and start with The Score. So I'll get that all arranged for you, and I'll be in touch if there's any questions and with the confirmation of those details too. Yeah, enjoy your night.
You too, bye.
Thank you, bye.
Let's go!
And then the email offer, which was the closest thing I got to a contract, was sent to me March 16th because I didn't end up going with this one. And then for Vendor PM, product design intern as well, I applied February 24th with this resume. I don't think I sent a cover letter. And then the first interview, which was 30 minutes with HR, it was a general screening call with a few generic questions, March 3rd. And then the second interview, which was 30 minutes with the director of product design, that was March 9th, which was actually the same day as my first round interview with The Score. And then I received my verbal and the contract March 16th. And so I decided between the 2 offers on March 17th. I started work with Vendor PM May 9th, and my contract is officially ending on August 25th. So with timelines out of the way, because I know you guys always love timelines, here is a more in-depth explanation on how you could approach internship or job hunting, and some of this is taken from my own experience, and I will make a separate video on how I got started in product design and how you can too. But for now, let's assume that you do have the base knowledge and skills to get a job or get an internship in, let's say, product design, and now you're maybe wondering how you can maximize your chances of doing so. And so the video is split into 4 parts. The first part is about finding the right places to apply. The second is about building your interviewing skills after you've applied and when you're waiting to hear back. And third is about the 3 different layers of interview prep: company specific, interviewer specific, and role specific. And the 4th part is about what you do after your interview. Okay, so part 1 is finding the right places to apply. So firstly, if you're in co-op, make sure to prioritize the roles that are posted on your co-op portal, because sometimes companies only post specific job listings in co-op portals. So people who are not in co-op can't access those roles. And secondly, you have your typical public job portals like LinkedIn, Glassdoor, and Indeed. Make sure to set alerts for the keywords you're looking for. So for example, for me, the keywords that I was looking for included design intern, UX intern, and product design intern. And thirdly, find specific and more specialized job boards. So for example, my current internship, I actually didn't find on LinkedIn. I found it through this website called Early Stage Design Jobs. And if I hadn't seen it through this portal, I won't have my job today. But there are usually a lot of niche and specialized job boards out there. I'm sure to be on the hunt for those specialized job boards, because sometimes the positions that you find in those specialized job boards you won't find in your typical portals like LinkedIn, Indeed, and Glassdoor. And then part 2, so building your interviewing skills after you've applied and you're waiting to hear back. So start preparing your response to the common questions like, tell me about yourself, what are your strengths and weaknesses, what are 3 words to describe yourself, and maybe more product design specific, what's the difference between UX and UI, why are you interested in product design, walk me through a project on your portfolio, what does your design process look like in an ideal situation. So generally speaking, questions that you would be asked regardless of which company you're interviewing for. And a huge bonus is if you're able to do 1 or 2 mock interviews to get the delivery of your answers just right and to get maybe initial jitters out of the way. I'll link below 2 resources that I think might be helpful to you during your interview prep. Part 3, let's say a few weeks after you apply, you get an email and you have an invite for an interview. Congratulations, that's a huge huge win, and now you have to do some research before your interview. And so this is where the 3 layers of interview prep comes in. First is company specific, second is interviewer specific, and the third is role specific. So the first layer for the company, ask yourself questions like, what does this company do? How do they make money? What are some broad industry trends that are happening in their space right now? And why do you want to work for that company? And a bonus is if you're able to reach out to someone and connect with someone in that company. So for example, if I see someone who goes to the same university as me, I'll reach out to them on LinkedIn. I'll send them a connect request with a message and I'll be like, hi, I'm Raya. I applied to this job. I have an upcoming interview. And would you mind giving me 15-20 minutes of your time to chat more about the company and how you're finding a role? Try to get really creative with this. And for example, if this person was, let's say, an intern and they're, I don't know, an upper year student, you can ask them more about how this current work term that they have, how it compares to their previous work terms. And so throughout all this, try not to come off as, I'm meeting with you, I'm having a coffee chat with you because I want a job, but instead try to reframe it as, I'm curious about this person's career journey and how this company fits into their career journey. Another bonus is if you can check the company's Glassdoor profile and you can look at the reviews and see, let's say there's a common complaint in a lot of the reviews, and at the end of your interview, you can pose a question to try to address that or to see if maybe that's still happening at the company right now. And so personally, when I was doing my company-specific research on Glassdoor, I found that a lot of people were saying that it was a fast-growing startup, but I also found some reviews that were saying that because it's a fast-growing startup, that there were a few growing pains. And so one of the questions that I asked at the end of my interview to the hiring manager was how he felt about these growing pains because he was kind of new to the company and what was currently being done to address those growing pains. And so second is your interviewer specific research. So a question that you can ask for this is, who is my interviewer? And if you do know who it is, you can usually check it on their LinkedIn. And then you can ask yourself, what are some interesting points about their work history or their background that I can use as leverage during the interview? And so what I mean by this is, for example, you have the same university as your interviewer, you can use that to build rapport. Or maybe if you saw that they recently had a career transition, they used to be, I don't know, a nurse, and then now they're in product design, you can ask them about it and how they found that switch and how they're doing now. Or if they recently just started working at the company you're going to be interviewing for, you can ask how they're liking it so far, their first impressions about the company, and again, try to be really creative with this. And note that there are differences in how you should approach this depending on if your interviewer is a recruiter or a hiring manager. HR usually just asks screening questions, so very generic, general questions that anyone, regardless of role, would be asked. If it's a startup, maybe they'll ask you, what's your working style and how do you thrive in fast-paced environments? Why are you interested in this company? Why are you interested in this role? So this is where your company-specific research will come really in handy. Whereas the hiring manager, your hiring manager is usually the subject matter expert. So for example, I'm a product design intern. My hiring manager is the product design director. So if your first interview was with HR, your second interview will most likely be with someone who's a subject matter expert. So a full-time product designer, the product design director, and so people who can really ask a lot more about the craft and ask you to walk through your portfolio and ask questions about why you made this design decision over another. So a bonus is if you ask on who your interviewer is, you can also ask what your interview is going to be about. So when I was doing my interviewer specific research for Vendor PM, the job description actually included the names of the recruiter and the hiring manager. So that made my life super easy. So I could just search them up on LinkedIn and connect through there. So I reached out to the hiring manager, letting him know that I applied, and he actually forwarded my application to HR, and that's how I was able to get my foot in the door and get my first interview with HR. So in my experience of sliding into people's DMs, I'm just kidding. So in my experience reaching out to hiring managers on LinkedIn for a certain job that you apply for, they don't always get back. But when they do get back, it's almost always worth it. So to add on to that story, right now I'm actually starting to interview for fall 2022 roles, and I think 3 weeks ago, I reached out to the director of product design at another company, letting them know that I applied for a role. And they also did the same thing. They forwarded my application to the recruiter, and I had my interview sometime around last week. And so this method works, and I don't know if I would have my job right now if I hadn't done this and messaged the hiring manager way back in March. It's also not that hard to make a template response, and you can just change the name to whoever you're addressing it to. And with company and interviewer specific research out of the way, now you have your role specific specific research. So questions that you can ask yourself include, why are you interested in a career in this role? Why should we hire you for this role? So you can maybe touch on your background and experiences. What are you looking to learn in this internship and role? And for this, maybe you can answer with a skill gap that you've personally identified and you want to grow more in. And a pro tip that I have for role-specific research and identifying skill gaps in general is to look at job descriptions for full-time roles. So for example, if I'm looking to land a product design internship and I'm not sure what skills I would like to learn, I'd look at full-time product design roles. And you can try to see if there are any specific experiences or requirements in the job description that you don't have at the moment. And so in answering the question of what are you trying to learn from this internship, you can show a lot of, I think, initiative and self-awareness by telling them that these are my skills and these are certain skill gaps that I have, and this is what I'm trying to do to learn those skills. And I think it's also good practice. Like, you don't necessarily have to be preparing an interview to do this research, because that way you can have a better idea of where you are right now in your career and what you're aiming at and what you want to learn in the near future or during your internship. And a few notes as you're preparing for your interview. First, try to tailor your response to the interview question based on the job description. So for my vendor PM job description, it mentioned that the ideal candidate was someone who could wear multiple hats, as it was a fast-growing startup and it was fast-paced environment. And so when I answered the tell me about yourself question at the start, I made an effort to mention that phrase of I'm able to wear multiple hats because XYZ, to tailor my response to the job description. I also try to print and annotate the job description beforehand, just for easy and quick reference during the job interview. And another note is that you should make a list of questions that you want to ask at the end. Usually you'll have 15 minutes, so prepare 5 to 10 solid questions, the more the better. And these questions can be about the company, the interviewer, the role, and so questions that hopefully you should have naturally came to by your research as you were preparing for the interview. And so my perspective on asking questions is that if companies interview candidates to figure out if they're a good fit for the company, then candidates also should be able to ask the company or the interviewers questions to find out if they're a good fit for the company. And this is especially important if you have, let's say, 2 competing offers and you're trying to choose between which company you want to go with. And that was a dilemma that I faced, and a few of the questions I asked at the end of both interviews for the SCORE and Vendor PM helped me decide between which offers I was going to go with. And I'll put a link below if you need more ideas on what kind of questions that you can ask at the end of an interview. And lastly, it's super easy to go overboard when you're preparing for an interview, so try to focus on the essentials and on the things that you know for a fact are going to be asked in your interview. So for example, for product design, that's the tell me about yourself question and the portfolio case study review. And you'll for sure going to be asked more than these 2 questions, but as you gain experience interviewing, you'll start to learn which questions to anticipate, and you can start learning and having a set response for those questions. And if you've ever been asked a question that's completely caught you off guard in an interview, don't be afraid to say something like, that's a good question, do you mind giving me a few moments to think through my answer? So you don't have to rush in answering the interviewer's questions, and they might even appreciate you more for the fact that you were willing to slow down and think through a more coherent answer rather than just trying to word vomit and say everything and anything that comes to your mind. And at the end of the day, it's just a conversation. Of course, it's a little more high stakes than your regular conversation, but it's just someone trying to get to know you better, and vice versa. You're trying to get to know them and the company better. And so part 4, after the interview. So right after the interview, try to recall and collect and just write down all the questions that you were asked, and especially the questions that you found you had trouble answering. And this is so you can use past interviews to refine how you answer questions, how you frame your experiences, and present yourself in general. So for example, the tell me about yourself question, there's so many ways to answer that, and it's almost always the first question in any interview, regardless of how it's worded. And here's another pro tip. So I actually started doing this really recently is, let's say I have my interview on my laptop, and then I'll have my phone open to this app called Otter, which is basically an audio transcribing app. And so as I'm speaking to the interviewer, it takes notes for me, it transcribes the whole conversation. And so that way I'm able to actually focus and pay attention in the interview and not be preoccupied about taking notes. And it's also really cool because it separates the different speakers, so I can go ahead and look back at what they asked asked me, and then I can see what I responded. And with that, it's also really easy to collect all the questions that they ask you. And so another thing you should do after your interview is to send a thank you email. If you don't know the email of the person who interviewed you, you can usually ask HR or whoever contacted you first. Here's usually the email of what I sent, and you can feel free to copy bits and pieces of that. And I personally send it an hour or two after my interview, or if my interview ends late, I'll send it at like 9 a.m. in the morning. And after all that work of applying to the job, getting the interview, preparing for the interview, doing the interview, sending the thank you letters, after all that, what do? Well, you wait. So maybe after a week or 2 weeks, maybe you get an offer, maybe you'll get an invite for another interview, or maybe you don't hear back at all. So in the case that you don't hear back 2 weeks after your interview, I'd send a gently worded follow-up email to whoever contacted you. And if they still don't get back to you 2 weeks after you sent the follow-up email, send another follow-up email. And if they don't respond after that, then I'm afraid they've ghosted you. And that's a very unfortunate circumstance, and it happened to me once actually when I was applying for my summer work term. And so yeah, job hunting is tough, especially if you're looking for your very first work term as a student. But the positive side of that is that there are a lot of ways to stand out, and it can be as simple as reaching out to the hiring manager on LinkedIn. And so in the beginning, when you're looking for your very first product design job, or really in any career that you're looking for a job in, you will have to apply a lot. So keep track of all your applications, use Excel if you want, and use the interviews that you do have to get more experienced at interviewing. And so when the interview for a role that you really want comes along, your interview skills are top notch and you're able to land that job. And if your interview is held online, record yourself so you can not just keep track of the questions that you've been asked, but also so you can take the learnings from that interview and take to the next one. And hopefully before you know it, interviewing isn't as difficult or as intimidating as it was before. And so to summarize this whole video, the first part was about finding the right places to apply. The second part is about building your interviewing skills after you've applied and you're waiting to hear back. Third part is about the 3 different layers of interview prep. So company specific, interviewer specific, and role specific. And then part 4 is about what you do after your interview. So earlier in the video, I said that we were operating on the assumption that you already have the base knowledge and skills to land an internship, but at one point I didn't have those skills. So my next video will be about how I built up my skills in product design and how I built my experience as a self-taught designer. Subscribe so you don't miss that video because I know that one's going to be really interesting, kind of biased, but that said, I hope that you find this video helpful because I already know that I'm going to be putting in a ton of work editing this video with all the snippets on the side. And if you found this video helpful, make sure to hit the thumbs up button down below and subscribe to see more content like this. And if you have time, make sure to watch this video or this video. I'm Raya and thank you for watching, and see you soon. Have a good week. I think weekend. I don't know when I'll be posting this. There are differences. Part 3 was 30 minutes, and then the first interview, which was 30 minutes with